Well, tonight begins these 3 sacred days, the Triduum. This is just their glorious celebrations, and they draw together the deepest meanings of our faith. First of all, just to mention that what Jesus was celebrating that night that's retold in this gospel was the Passover meal. It's approximately 3,500 years, 3,500 years of celebrating that every year. I think that's extraordinary. It's not just a custom, but it was at the heart of the Jewish experience, and the Jews are our roots, so it's our feast too. But at this celebration, they were celebrating God's saving activity, choosing Moses, sending him to the Pharaoh, and eventually freeing all of them to go to this promised land, this covenantal land that God had prepared for them. Now, granted, there's an ugly piece in this that God sent an angel to kill the firstborn of every beast and of man. But again, these stories wrap up these tremendously deep and mystical and mythical and great stories of salvation and of God's love. But that's what Jesus was celebrating. And then Jesus chose to do something more. In the midst of that meal, he added to it. Never been done before. He took bread, he broke it, he said, "This is my body, eat it." I don't think they knew what that meant. He took a cup and said, "This is my blood, drink it." I don't think they knew what it meant. But something amazing was happening there. We like to say that that's the night he instituted the Eucharist. And I think that's probably the clearest example. Did he do that more with his disciples other times? I don't know. But that's what we always root back to this moment when the Eucharist was instituted. And here, over 2,000 years later, that's what we do. We break the bread and we drink from the cup. Well, we were drinking from the cup before the pandemic, but we break the bread and drink from the cup. We share the Eucharist. Christ becomes our food for our spirit. And all began on this night, Holy Thursday. We also very loosely connect this to be the institution of priesthood, and it's loosely because he said, "Do this in remembrance of me." Whenever you do this in memory of me. And so we see a linkage to the beginning of priesthood, although, again, it's not very clear from scriptures whether they knew that at the time. But very shortly after, and perhaps one of my favorite stories is the Emmaus story that we hear, I believe it's the second week or the third week of Easter, third Sunday, when the 2 disciples went on their journey from Jerusalem to Emmaus, and Jesus suddenly began walking with them. It was after the resurrection, and they didn't recognize him. They walked for 7 miles talking to him. He was explaining all the scriptures. They didn't have a clue who he was, not a clue. And when they finally reached the point, Emmaus, because it was late, they said to him, "Sir, it's late. Why don't you stay?" And they were doing their typical Jewish hospitality to feed him and take care of their guests that they had walked with for 7 miles. And then it happened. It said he took bread, blessed it, and broke it, and suddenly their eyes were open. They were opened in the breaking of the bread. And here, 2,000 years later, we will break the bread again tonight, as we do every day, every Sunday. We gather as a Eucharistic people to do so. Well, that's what this night gathers for us. This momentous evening, this first of these 3 holy days. And I would say these are the holiest days of the whole year. Clearly, these 3 days. But then something extra happened. Jesus got up at a point in John's Gospel only, and he took off his outer garment, which I'll do dramatically in a few moments. And then he put a little apron around him, and he got down and washed their feet. And he told them he was going to give them an example, a model that they should also do. Now, every year I try to see if there's something new I haven't known yet, and so I found something. I was curious about the washing of the feet because there are stories, Jesus himself used examples when he said the kingdom of heaven is like, and the one that I like very much is when he says that the head of a household went off to a wedding feast, and when he came back, he was expecting his servants to be there to wait for him. They would traditionally bring out the light for the pathway so he could get into the house without tripping, and then they would wash his feet because they wore sandals, and of course their feet would get quite dirty. And I've just always assumed, well, of course that's what the Jewish servants did. But I read from a commentator today, and more than one, that said the Jews did not have to wash the feet of others. They were released from this. They probably most did, I guess. But it was considered, I suppose, a particularly unclean and crude thing. And the Jews had all kinds of rules about what was clean and unclean, what was untouchable, uneatable. These things were very central in their religious practice. So they didn't have to do this. So for Jesus, a Jew, and the Jews themselves said, you don't have to do that. For him as teacher and master, he even quotes them. He says, you call me teacher and master, and so I am. But do what I'm going to do for you. And then he washed their feet. It's about the most humble thing that you could expect a person to do. And he was giving at Eucharist, at this night that this was established, do this in memory of me. He gave them the gift and the call to service. I think that puts service way at the top of the list. I'd like to say I think there's probably, other than loving and forgiving, nothing more sacred for us to do than learn how to serve. I read many years ago that Dr. Livingston, even in the cartoons they used to say, Dr. Livingston, I presume. Dr. Livingston went on a spiritual journey into Africa, and he taught many things. But one of the things he said was, if you want to know joy in your life, learn how to serve. And I think it's true. I see it all the time in the church. This large group of volunteers that we have here happened as a result of the pandemic. And as we were going back and forth, just a few of us at the beginning, taking everything out there from Mass and bringing it all back every single day, this group of volunteers just began to grow. Can we help? Can we do a part of this with you? Let us be there with you. And then they began to help in the service of the community, and they kept it going even till this day. In fact, much of what happens tonight is a result of their working here and preparing for this. So today, this is a big night for us. This is a night where Jesus set a pattern for us. He gave us a call. He suggested to us that if we watched what he did and learned from him, I think, in other words, he'd say, I'm going to give you life. You're going to get more life. This is the key. Estoy diciendo, sin repitiendo todo, que la cosa más grande que Jesús dio en esta noche, aparte de dándonos la Eucaristía, su cuerpo y su sangre para comer y beber, Él dio un llamado a nosotros que podemos, como Él, ser servidores. Entonces, Él lavando los pies de los discípulos, los apóstoles, era una cosa, tremendo. Porque Él está pidiendo lo mismo de nosotros. Y la cosa de servir es, yo creo, uno de los llamados más altos. Y por mí personalmente, me gusta. Yo no miro todas las misas de Vaticano. Está muy grande y solemne y todo, pero si yo voy a buscar uno, es cuando el Papa en Roma lavan los pies de los 12 personas y besan los pies. Y por mí es algo elegante, porque Él es como decimos, el presidente de los United States es uno de los oficinas más poderosos en el mundo. El Papa es solo uno. Y el Papa es Papa de toda la iglesia, más que 1 billón personas. Y él lava y besa los pies de los 12. Entonces yo creo que esta noche estamos recibiendo este gran llamado y en invitación a recibir esta vida de Cristo. Y vamos a hacerlo en canción y es solo simbólicamente. Y no voy a besar los pies porque no estoy muy humilde con el Papa. Y también si yo voy a ir en mis rodillas, necesita 10 personas a levantarme, ¿ok? Pero estamos aquí a simbólicamente apreciar esta invitación de Cristo.